Welcome to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee. And today, I have the privilege of being in conversation with one of the most significant upcoming conductors of his generation, having worked in the symphonic and in the operatic fields. Currently, he is developing his doctorate studies at the Peabody Institute of Johns Hopkins University under the mentorship of Marin Alsop, where he is serving as her graduate assistant. In 2022, he joined the Hopkins Symphony Orchestra in the position of assistant conductor. Please welcome Juliano Aniceto. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Rob. Such a pleasure to be with you and share this conversation with you today.
Yes, it's a privilege and a pleasure to have you on here. And I mean, I'm getting the upper crust. I'm getting a little bit of like refinedness here. I'm talking to people who are in classical music. I mean, I'm just a guy from East Baltimore, but I mean, what are we doing here? What are we doing? So many things. So yeah, again, thank you. And before we get too deep into the conversation, could you share with me, like, pretty much like your story, like in the distilled format, like ultimately how you got here? Like, some people may say, "Hey, I just, took a left and then came down this street." Other people have a long, winding road. So, what is the Juliano story? Tell me.
Yeah, so let's make it short. When I was born in 1987, just kidding.
Nice.
I think that will be a little bit too long. I am a conductor, as you said. I'm passionate about music and about people. And I was born in Brazil. I was born in São Paulo state, São Paulo city, in Brazil. I'm 35 years old, and we were living in São Paulo, and after some years, when I was 8 years old, my father, lost his job in São Paulo, and we moved to Rio de Janeiro. And there I had my first contact with music. We lived in the favelas in Rio de Janeiro, and I had my first contact with music, and it was such an amazing thing. I used to play the flute, and flute is my passion. It's one of my favorite instruments, and I dedicated myself for many years for this instrument. But classical music was never a thing in the community I live in.
Sure.
I lived in Brazil. So when I was about 18 years old, the Brazilian Symphony Orchestra decided to play a concert in a church, and my family decided to go. And for the first time, I heard a symphony orchestra in my life.
Yeah. And
that changed completely my perspective of music, my perspective of world, and how I would live for the next decades or until now. So that was a really life-changing experience. And when I decided to become a conductor, so it was a long journey from Rio de Janeiro, and then start the early studies in classical music, being late bird, as people say here in the United States. My parents, they started classical music when they were 3-6 years old. I started when I was 18. So, but I think in some way the passion for this kind of music makes things so much better and so much joyful.
Yeah.
So I was able to keep developing, and so at some point I was working in Brazil as a conductor already. In the operatic world and also in the symphonic world as assistant conductor of orchestras and opera houses in Brazil. And I decided that was time to explore the world. And, sometimes we need to have these primary sources to have contact with who did it, with the main sources of inspiration. And this is when I decided to move abroad. So yeah. I thought about Europe, I thought about the United States, and I ended up coming to the US. I did my master's in North Carolina, and then I had the big dream that, to be really honest, I didn't believe I would be able to study with Marin Alsop at the Peabody Institute of the Johns Hopkins University. But gladly, I'm here, and I just will keep going. And that's a little bit on how I got to, cutting a lot of details, but how I got here.
Thank you for sharing this. So you didn't come here for the crab cakes and the great weather. Good to know. Good to know.
Yeah, but I literally have to say that that's a good portion of why I am in Baltimore.
That's great. That's great. So you've been like in this sort of space, being a conductor, being in this space for the better part of half your life at this point. And
Yes.
so walk us back through that moment when you're like, what was the feelings? What was the kind of the setting of when you realized like, yeah, this is what I want to put my life towards. This is what I want to do. I can remember like when I decided to at least have that curiosity to go into podcasting, I got just annoyed about like some news topic. And I was like, I think I got 5 minutes in me. And I just ranted about it for 5 minutes. And someone listened to it. It's like, you can just kind of keep talking, right? You could just keep doing that. And that was a moment where I was like, oh, I'm being heard for this opinion that I have. And it led to ultimately me doing this. So what was like that sort of feeling that you had that kind of informed you like, conductor, that's a thing for me?
There are so many layers for this topic that I think we can touch on all of them in a certain level. I always have been well-trained introvert. I'm an introvert and I was trained through life to behave like a non-introvert. I will never say as an extrovert, but and I always loved music.
Sure.
I loved people. So for me, the idea of becoming a flute player was rather challenging, despite the fact that I love music. For playing the flute, I always liked to play in bands, to play in pop bands, in folk groups, and this idea of having a large group of people with whom I could interact and get to know, the curiosity about people always was something that was present on me. But to be really honest, the moment that I heard the symphony orchestra for the first time, it was really life-changing. And when I could see the conductor shaping the sound through his hands without saying a single word, that was something that deeply moved me. And to see how beautiful that music is. Classical music, I used to tell this to all my friends, it's an experience. You can listen to the radio. It's cool, of course. I love listening classical music in the radio, but in the concert hall, oh my God, it's a completely different perspective. You can see the passion on the eyes of the musician. You can see everybody excited. You can, experience that moment. So for me, that experience was really meaningful, and it definitely shaped who I am today.
100%. That's great. So in traveling, you mentioned coming from Brazil, coming from South America, and kind of doing different opportunities there to learn in this craft and this skill and this art. So having that experience and then coming up here to the U.S., what were some of the memorable experiences you've had in your career thus far that you're like, that really sticks out, or that was a really bad time, or this was a great learning experience? What are some of those memorable things that stick out for you?
My gosh, there are so many. I'll give some.
Sure.
Some memorable moments were definitely in my career were when I got to places that I have never thought I would be at some point. So, on the good side, of course, I think the first time I conducted in Sala São Paulo, the main concert hall of Latin America, I would say, the first time I stepped on the stage was really, really special. I was conducting the São Paulo State Youth Orchestra, and also, of course, saying chronological order, not in ranking, but that was fantastic. I remember there was a guy. He was basically the assistant for the concert hall itself, and he was supposed to open the doors for me to come into the stage. And I was so happy that I just jumped on him and hugged him, and I was hugging literally everybody that was around me. And everybody thought, oh my gosh, this guy is over. What's happening here? I just could not contain my excitement, because as soon as I decided to be conductor, I decided to do some research. And that concert hall, because it's the main hall of Brazil, was always in the researches I did. And to be honest, I thought, oh my gosh, I'll never go to that place. And when I could step on the stage on that place was absolutely incredible. And the musicians were so kind. It was a great concert. Another one I would say was the day of my audition at Johns Hopkins.
Oh.
Auditions can be really frightening, can be really stressful. And of course, I was stressed with my audition. But Marin also has such a way to be human, to understand, to be much more than the star she is. People say, oh my gosh, Marin Alsop's a star. And yes, she is. She's a star and she's great. But when you get to know Marin Alsop as a human being, you see why and where the star really is. You know, the star is in her heart. And it's really nice it was a wonderful moment to conduct for the first time for my hero. And she had never seen me conduct. And I came, of course, shaking all my body, hands and legs. And she was so very kind to me. And it was definitely a day that I'll never forget. The day that I had the opportunity to conduct for my hero.
That's really cool. And they talk about, on occasion, you should never meet your heroes or what have you. But I think when it works out and they're, at a minimum decent, and if at the maximum, like really good and really kind and gracious, it's a good experience. It's a great experience. And there are a few people that are in, they're in my shoot your shot list of like, all right, I need to get this person for an interview. And they fall into this realm of people I really look up to and, that I kind of classify as a hero or what have you, just because of the way they go about things. And, kind of touching on one of the things that I'm picking up, like, this will never happen. And then when it happens, you're like, oh, wow, now my palms are sweaty and I can't fit my clothing anymore. What am I going to do? So definitely I relate in that regard. And I don't know if I'm an introvert or an extrovert. I like to look at it like I'm a shy extrovert.
Mm-hmm.
I like to look at it that way. Like, one-to-one, I'm good. If there's a group of people, I'm sending the representative. And I don't know, like, being on stage, that notion is frightening, and having to remember stuff like a conductor does, I don't know.
Yeah, it's, I always try to think when I'm really nervous about something, about the joy that is to be a musician,
Yeah.
and how much I fought to become a conductor. So, there is a sentence in Portuguese that I didn't walk this far to get this far. So
I love it.
you need to move to go forward. Every step that you give forward makes you look back and say no. So I cannot walk that much to stop here. I need to keep going. So I think this is a thing that I always think on when I come to this stage. This is the moment that I expected for months, for years, for decades at this point.
I like to look at it like that. I'm gonna steal that, but also this sort of idea of like anything that comes with it, with what I'm doing, I asked for it. That's the way that I look at it. Like, getting more attention, bringing in different guests, and having this sort of like diverse like tapestry of conversations. It's going to open me up to have so many different opportunities present themselves. So it's like, if you're not going for that, then really, what are you doing? It's always progressing. And I'm a tinkerer, and I don't know if you are, but I'm a tinkerer. And I got a question that relates to this later. I like to like tweak things a little bit and make it my own. And, that's how I apply it to this podcast. And one of the things that I'm looking at is like, I recognize what it is, but I'm trying to take some of the things that I learned through these conversations and reading art books of, all right, let's not recreate the same thing that I did. Let's not recreate interviews that the guest has done already. Let's try to bring something unique and try to get them not necessarily uncomfortable, but have them thinking maybe in a different way. So I have like a table of questions that I ask, and I retire them like every year. to bring in new questions and new ideas. And, I look back at old interviews. I was like, wow, I can't believe I asked that. So like that was nothing thoughtful there. Nothing came out of that. So I want to clarify this real quick. What is the difference between an opera, an orchestra, and a symphony? I heard the terms. I don't know what they mean. So help us, me, the listeners, all of that good stuff. Please break this down for us.
Sure. So the orchestra is nowadays the group of musicians. So in general, we have violins. The orchestra is divided in sections. So we have the strings, the violin, viola, cello, double bass. We have the woodwinds, flutes, oboes, bassoons, clarinets, and some auxiliary instruments. We have the brass section. That's trumpets, horns, trombones, and you have the percussion section. So this group of instruments, it's called nowadays the orchestra. A symphony is a genre that is frequently played by the orchestra. So, but not only. Actually, we have symphonies for wind bands. We have symphony for mixed groups or for chamber groups, which means really small group of players. So it's a genre in four movements, and it was developed through the classical period. And of course, with everybody knows Beethoven 9 and of the most famous symphonies. So it's a kind of composition. When we talk about opera is a melodramatic construction. So we have this is the connection between theater and music. And as it happened in the past, the music that was played in opera is what we call today classical music. So we have, at that point, they didn't have the microphones as we have today. So the singers, they use a specific technique, the lyric singing, to project their voices over the orchestra. So this is why the opera and the sopranos and the tenors, they have that specific color, and because they use a technique that allows them not to use a microphone and cut the sound of the orchestra and be heard, despite the fact that sometimes they have a 70 people orchestra behind them playing full force, and still then they can be heard. So when you talk about opera, we're talking about a theater play that's sang, like for example, a Broadway musical.
Yeah.
But with classical music and lyric singing. In general, the most famous opera, the golden age of the opera, is the Romantic Italian opera. For example, the Germanic Romantic opera that we're talking about the second half of the 19th century and the first decades of the 20th century sometimes. So we're talking about this theater that connects with music. So you literally have a storytelling. You have a storytelling on the stage. The story is either fully sang or in certain parts is spoken, and we have singing parts as well. So it's basically a show.
Thank you for clarifying that. And I think it's a good segue to this one question I have that's a little further ahead, but I think I'll go into it. Do you have a favorite piece of music that comes? And I know it's hard. It's hard to ask a person as a music person, do you have a favorite piece? But, if someone was like, you only have one piece of music that you can conduct for the rest of your life, what would that piece be? And I have a part B to that, but I'll let you start off there.
Yeah, I'm fascinated about rhythm, and if I would try probably to sneak some pieces together to bring the same, illegally in my pocket. For this favorite piece package, but it changes every 3 hours. My favorite piece is a kind of a nightmare in my head. But nowadays I'm really into Johannes Brahms, a composer, and I think his first symphony is one of my favorites. If this podcast would happen in 3 hours, I would have a different answer. So probably if this podcast happened in 3 hours, I would say that I would take Villa-Lobos, a composer from Brazil, Choros number 10, that's inspired on indigenous communities singing with choir and orchestra. And if you ask me in 6 hours, I would have asked today that I would answer probably that is Rite of Spring by Stravinsky. So this connection with nature is something that really intrigues me, and I think orchestra can replicate really well the sounds of nature, and I'm always fascinated by that.
So it's fair to say that music is very dynamic for you, being that, 3 hours later it's a different thing. So what would you say? Like, so if you have a piece, and I think I have a sense of it based on how you started off that answer, do you ever try to put your own spin on an arrangement, or is a classic a classic?
I think really depends. With the Romantic era and with the arrival of the recordings, in a certain way, all the scores, they became something that's really religious, and people follow the score really religiously, as people follow the Bible sometimes, or any sacred book. There are, of course, several interpretations of these works, and everybody has a different interpretation, but there are some scores that we are more likely to have an insert or to cut things out, because we think, oh my gosh, this was way too much. Let's cut this section out. In opera is more common, but
Sure.
in symphonic music, it's a little bit less common, but it happens sometimes. So I remember I conducted a piece by Gilbert and Sullivan. It's an operetta, that's a small opera, called Trial by Jury in Brazil. And we decided to change everything. So we inserted Brazilian rhythms and Brazilian instruments, and we made basically Trial by Jury become a party. And that really well. I mean, it was really fun. Everybody was dancing by the end, and for me, this is what classical music is, and classical music needs to be something that people have fun with.
Do you feel that in taking that sort of approach, and I love the way you described that, do you think that is almost kind of a way to meet people where they're at, to broaden it? I know that I asked a similar question to Jonathan Hayward about, like, how can this be a little bit more like classical music in a macro sort of way? How can it be more inviting to audiences that this doesn't seem like this would be your type of music or your type of scene? Was that an effort to say, you know what, I'm going to make this a party? This is still classical music, but this is something that's for the people that are here. They're going to get it.
100%. I think this idea of connecting past and present and different cultures. Sometimes we have the feeling that we are inserted in a monochromatic culture, and this is absolutely not true. Everything we hear during the day, either in the car, in the radio, on the bus stop, on elevator, everything is connected through different cultures at some point. And I think sometimes we need to make these connections, including time-wise. So the idea when I did that was with the English opera. With that specific piece was exactly to bring the humor that were in this British humor more close to the Latin American flavor, and show that we can have fun with any kind of music expression if the piece is funny and if the intention of the work is that.
Thank you. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this is the last real question I have, and like I said, you're still going to get those rapid fire questions. But so give us that rundown on how do you get ready for a concert, and what would be the most, something that's difficult for you as a conductor. So how do you get ready for a concert, and what is like something that's just super difficult for you?
So my process to get ready for a concert starts with of course the planning of the repertoire. So see what pieces and I would like to perform, or the orchestra is receptive to perform. And on that matter, I have a pretty open approach. Of course, I have the pieces that I love to conduct, but I try to avoid them at all costs. For me, the concert should be a celebration of the community, celebration of who is listening.
Sure.
So it's going to be really, really hard for somebody to see me conducting that's something that's completely out of the range of some certain community. I always like to discuss the repertoire that's going to be made with the people that are going to either organize the concert or invite people over, or how they're going to promote. So that was one of the conversations that I had with Rafaela Drazing when we were working on the Hopkins Symphony Orchestra about the programs, is to create programs that can serve the community who attends the concert and what they would like to hear, and how can we challenge them to hear different things but not blindside them. So for me, this is the first part. After that is score studying. For me, I like to have a score in advance and study the score to a certain point that I can almost feel the music inside me. It's not about knowing only my brain, but for me, it's really important to feel the music. The emotional aspect for me is really important, and I try to imagine the situations and read about the composer and what he was passing through when he was composing that piece, and try to imagine the sound world of that piece. And that was one of the biggest contributions that I think Marin gave me, was this idea of thinking about a sound world where every composer is inserted in, and to try to bring that alive again, what he thought as a sound, what he would like or she would like to sound, the orchestra to sound, sorry. And after that, rehearsals. And rehearsals are really, really interesting part of my job. Maybe is my favorite part of the job, just because I have the opportunity to tell musicians and to share with them the experience, not only tell them what to do, but also receive their perspectives, sometimes change my mind, and have this interaction that sometimes has no words, but sometimes is really about dialogue, musical dialogue. And for me, this is incredible. And then concert. And the concert for me is a celebration. Concert for me is the time that we go on the stage and we show, we share with people what we had best. Many times I always say this either in my rehearsals or for my students. In the past, there used to be we used to have conductors that would say, "Oh, my dream, my job is basically to take from the musicians what they have best." And after many years thinking, I think we don't take anything from anybody. I think we just create the conditions for everybody to share. And then they feel free to share, and they share, and it's basically like a party, Everybody brings a piece of food, and everybody will always bring some food back, which is like a miracle, right? Yeah. You bring a plate of food, and everybody brings a plate of food, and everybody gets full and stuffed and happy and drinks and eats, and there is always leftovers that everybody's bringing back. So I don't know how that happens, but in certain way, music is like that. Nobody loses anything. The more we share, the more we have.
That's great. And if it was one thing that you found this to be super difficult in the process of being a conductor, what would that be?
My gosh, there are so many. I think nowadays we have such such an environment, such a space where we need to have marketing and everything, and we need to promote ourselves, and we need space, I think. And on top of that, you need to study scores, and you need to study how to deal with people, and you need to I think the hardest part for me is to understand how many topics conducting embraces. Not only music. Music is the best part of conducting, of course, but there are so many other things that are related to music that are not exactly part of the profession, but are essential for the career of a conductor. So sometimes I caught myself a little bit overwhelmed with so many things that I have to do, or I forget one area. Oh my gosh, I don't upload my website for 3 months now. What happened? And, sometimes this kind of extra information can be a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, I want to wind down these next few minutes with, I got a couple rapid fire questions. Don't overthink them. They're just quick questions. And one is ridiculous that I just added, and it's definitely will time when we're doing this, but I thought it would be prudent to ask it because you talked about the background with the flute. So, flautist question here for you. But I want to start off with a softball for you. Dark chocolate or milk chocolate?
Oh, dark chocolate for sure.
It's a very South American answer. It's the right answer, actually. Do you have a hidden talent? If so, what is it?
I love cooking. Oh my God. Yes.
Okay. Feel like cocina? No, I don't know. This is the last one I got for you. See, you're knocking these out really quickly. This is the most ridiculous one, but I saw it in the news recently. So Lizzo was able to play the James Madison crystal flute. Is that something of interest to you? That from a flautist perspective, would you want to play that flute?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Yes. Wow. No, I saw a friend of mine, actually my boss. She went to the concert, and I was asking to see the videos of her playing on first hand. Can you show me if you recorded? And she was showing me. It was great.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So with that, I want to thank you for being on this podcast and sharing your story with me and the listeners. And I want to invite and encourage you to tell the fine folks, the listeners, where to check you out, your work, your social media, all of that good stuff. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you. You can check the Peabody Institute for the concerts that we have ahead. In our website, you can check, of course, the Hopkins Symphony Orchestra. We have 2 concerts coming up, one of them full of Latin American music, which I'm really excited to share with the public and with the orchestra. We have music from Brazil, from Argentina. You can check me also. You can follow me up on social media, Juliano Aniceto. And let's share this journey together.
Well, there you have it, folks. Again, for Juliano Aniceto, I am Rob Lee saying that there's art, there's music in and around your city. You just got to look for it.